Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Gilded Lies. Preston Harlow always believed his life was a testament to the American dream. Born to a working-class family in rural Montana, he had clawed his way to success through grit and determination. By 35, he had built Frontier Solutions, a thriving cybersecurity firm that protected some of the country's most sensitive data. His sprawling Tudor home in the suburbs of Denver housed what he believed was a picture-perfect family. His wife of 12 years, Vanessa, and their 3 children, 11-year-old Caleb, 8-year-old Lily, and 5-year-old Noah. Preston's father, Richard Harlow, had been his North Star, a self-made construction magnate whose approval Preston had spent a lifetime trying to earn. Every Sunday, the extended Harlow clan gathered at Richard's estate for dinner. Preston's younger brother Dominic, his sister Aubrey and her husband, and Preston's mother Diana. These gatherings had always felt strangely tense to Preston, filled with inside jokes he didn't understand and conversations that would abruptly cease when he entered a room. "You're always working too hard, Press," Dominic would say, clapping him on the shoulder. "You need to relax more, enjoy what's in front of you." Then he'd wink at Vanessa, who would laugh a little too enthusiastically. Preston had ignored these oddities, burying himself in his company's expansion. Vanessa had been supportive of his long hours, never complaining about his absence, which he had attributed to her understanding nature. In reality, his absence had given her precisely what she wanted: freedom. The cracks in Preston's perfect life began to show 3 months ago when his father was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Richard had refused treatment, choosing instead to spend his final days at home. As Richard's condition deteriorated, Preston had noticed Vanessa visiting his father's house at odd hours, claiming she was helping Diana cope. Preston had thought nothing of it until he discovered a text on Vanessa's phone one night while she slept. "Miss you already. These stolen moments aren't enough anymore." Preston had convinced himself it was a mistake, a message meant for someone else. The alternative was too painful to consider. At work, Preston's right-hand man and closest friend, Lawrence Patterson, had noticed his distraction. "Everything okay at home?" Lawrence had asked during a late strategy session. "Just worried about my father," Preston had replied, unwilling to voice his growing suspicions. Lawrence, a former military intelligence officer with sharp instincts, hadn't seemed convinced. "If you need anything at all, I'm here." No questions asked. As Richard's condition worsened, the family had begun keeping a bedside vigil. Preston had noticed how Vanessa held his father's hand when she thought no one was watching, the intimate way she leaned close to whisper in his ear. He'd seen the familiar way his brother and sister interacted with his wife, as if they shared secrets he wasn't privy to. On the night before his father's death, Preston had found Vanessa sobbing in the guest bathroom of Richard's house. "He can't die," she had whispered, not realizing Preston was at the door. "I can't lose him. He promised we'd be together eventually." Preston had backed away silently, his world beginning to crumble around him. Chapter 2, Deathbed Revelations. The night Richard Harlow died changed everything. The family had gathered in his bedroom, the air heavy with antiseptic and impending loss. The hospice nurse had just left to give them privacy after announcing Richard had hours, perhaps minutes, left. "I need to speak to Preston," Richard had rasped, his once powerful voice now a thread of sound. Alone, Vanessa had squeezed Richard's hand before leaving, a gesture too intimate for a daughter-in-law. Diana had patted Preston's shoulder as she passed, her eyes not meeting his. Alone with his dying father, Preston had sat in the chair beside the bed. "Dad, I'm here." Richard's eyes had opened, surprisingly clear despite the morphine. "I've never been proud of you, Preston, but I've always envied you." The words had cut deep. "Envied? What?" "Because she chose you." Richard's withered hand had grasped Preston's wrist with surprising strength. "But she never wanted you. During your father's deathbed confession, he revealed he'd been having an affair with your wife since your wedding day. She only married you to stay close to me," he whispered. Preston had felt the room spinning. "What are you saying?" "Vanessa and we've been together for 15 years. Since she was my administrative assistant. We were going to leave together, but I couldn't abandon Diana after her stroke." Richard's breathing had grown labored. When you brought her home as your girlfriend, it was the perfect solution. She could be in my life without suspicion. I'm sorry, Preston. I'm sorry we all lied. Oh, who else knows? Preston had demanded, while rising in his throat. Richard's eyes had begun to close. Everyone. Dominic. Aubrey. Diana. It was our arrangement. Our secret. And my children? Preston had whispered, already knowing the answer. But Richard had slipped away, a slight smile on his face as his last breath left his body. Numb with shock, Preston had stumbled from the room, ignoring the questioning looks from his family. He'd found himself in his father's study, the room where Richard had made all his important decisions. On the desk sat Richard's phone, unlocked. His father had never been technologically savvy, always leaving devices unsecured. With trembling fingers, Preston had opened the messaging app. There, he found a group chat titled simply Family Matters. The participants, Richard, Vanessa, Diana, Dominic, and Aubrey. He scrolled through years of messages, each more devastating than the last. Discussions about the arrangement, about keeping Preston in the dark, about ensuring he never discovered the rules. Vanessa, 3 years ago he's working late again. Your place or mine? Richard? Diana, 3 years ago use our lake house. Preston never goes there anymore. Dominic, 2 years ago congratulations, sis. Looks like I'm going to be a daddy again. Preston's so excited about his new baby, he's already painting the nursery. Aubrey, 2 years ago remember the rules. We never tell Preston. He's the golden goose, and we all benefit from his success. Preston had learned it all in those messages. How his father had used his money to fund Dominic and Aubrey's failed businesses. How Vanessa had married him only to maintain her relationship with Richard while gaining financial security. How his mother had facilitated it all to maintain access to Preston's wealth after Richard's poor investments had drained their savings. Most devastating, however, were the messages about his children. Caleb, fathered by Dominic. Lily, fathered by Richard himself. Noah, fathered by Bradley, Aubrey's husband. His entire family had been playing him for a fool, stealing not just his dignity, but even his right to true fatherhood. Preston had slipped the phone into his pocket and rejoined the grieving family, his face a mask of socially appropriate sadness. Inside, something had hardened, a kernel of rage so pure it transcended emotion and became purpose. Chapter 3: Confirmation and Exodus. The week following Richard's funeral was a choreographed performance in which Preston played his part flawlessly. On the outside, he was the grieving son, the supportive husband, the loving father. Inside, he was meticulously gathering evidence and making plans. Late one night in his home office, Preston had taken DNA samples from his sleeping children's hairbrushes. He'd sent them to a discreet testing facility Lawrence had recommended, paying a premium for expedited results. Meanwhile, he'd hidden motion-activated cameras throughout the house, capturing evidence of Vanessa's ongoing infidelity, now with Dominic, who had apparently been next in the rotation. Preston had also begun liquidating assets, transferring funds to offshore accounts set up under shell corporations. His years in cybersecurity had taught him how to cover digital tracks, and Lawrence had connections that ensured no trail led back to him. "Are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Lawrence had asked during a private lunch away from their offices. Preston had studied his friend, the only person he still trusted. "My whole life is a lie, Lawrence. My marriage, my family, my children, none of it was ever real." He'd explained everything, watching Lawrence's expression shift from disbelief to horror to cold anger. "What do you need from me?" Lawrence had asked when Preston finished. "I need to disappear. Completely. And later, I'll need help with rectifying the situation." Lawrence hadn't flinched. "Consider it done." 3 days later, the DNA results had arrived, confirming what Preston already knew. None of the children he'd raised as his own shared his genetic material. The final piece of evidence had fallen into place. That evening, Preston had waited until Vanessa returned from what she'd called a grief support group, which he now knew was a rendezvous with Dominic. He'd sat in the darkened living room, his father's phone on the coffee table before him. When Vanessa had entered, he'd simply said, "We need to talk about the arrangement." Her face had drained of color. What arrangement? Preston had pushed play on a recording from the bedroom camera, showing Vanessa and Dominic together just 2 days after Richard's funeral. "Your entire family shares everything," she'd said after a long silence. her voice cold and calculating. You were the only one who didn't know the rules. Richard started it all. He needed to control everything and everyone. Your mother accepted it to keep her lifestyle. Dominic and Aubrey joined in because they needed the money. And me? I married you because Richard asked me to. It was always him I wanted. And the children? Preston had asked, his voice deadly calm. They were part of the arrangement. Richard wanted heirs without the responsibility. Dominic wanted to prove he could take what was yours. Bradley went along with it to keep Aubrey happy. She'd laughed bitterly. You never noticed because you were too busy building your empire. You gave us everything but your attention. The DNA test confirmed it, Preston had said. All three of them. Not my blood. For a brief moment, Vanessa had looked regretful. The kids love you, Preston. Despite everything, they do. You're the only father they know. Were you ever going to tell me? No, she'd answered honestly. The plan was that you would never know. Richard controlled everything. The money, the relationships, all of it. We just followed his lead. Preston had stood then, eerily calm. I see. Well, I appreciate your honesty, finally. What happens now? Vanessa had asked, suddenly wary. Nothing. We go on as before. Preston had replied, his face unreadable. Vanessa, thinking she'd won, had relaxed visibly. I think that's best for the children. That night, Preston had waited until Vanessa was asleep before slipping from the bed. He'd gone to each child's room, looking at them one last time. Despite knowing the truth, part of him still loved them. They were innocent in this conspiracy. But he couldn't stay. Every time he looked at them, he would see only betrayal. In his office, he'd left a simple note. I know everything. Goodbye. By morning, Preston Harlow had vanished completely. No credit card trails, no phone signals, no digital footprint. The only person who knew anything was Lawrence, who had offered only one piece of information when questioned by the authorities. He found out the truth about his family. He won't be coming back. What no one realized was that Preston hadn't left. He had simply ceased to exist. In his place, a new man was being born, one focused solely on justice. Or perhaps more accurately, revenge. Chapter 4, Ghost in the Machine. The man who had once been Preston Harlow spent the first year of his new life in a remote cabin in Alaska, owned by a shell corporation created by Lawrence. The property, accessible only by seaplane, became his monastery, a place to excise his former self and forge something new from the molten rage inside him. He adopted a new name, Garrett Reed. Lawrence had created an impeccable identity, complete with a digital footprint stretching back decades. On paper, Garrett was a former security consultant who had made his fortune in private contracts before retiring to focus on investments. During those long winter months, with only the howling wind and occasional visits from Lawrence for company, Garrett underwent both physical and psychological transformations. The soft-bodied corporate executive disappeared, replaced by a lean, hardened figure through brutal daily training regimens. He grew a beard, dyed his naturally brown hair a darker shade, and learned to alter his posture and speaking patterns. They wouldn't recognize you now, Lawrence observed during one visit, watching Garrett split wood outside the cabin, his muscular frame moving with machine-like precision. That's the point, Garrett replied, his voice now deliberately pitched lower than Preston's had been. Preston Harlow was a fool who trusted too easily. He's dead. What about the kids? Lawrence asked carefully. They're still asking about you. The oldest one, Caleb, he's been acting out, searching for you online. Something flickered across Garrett's face, a remnant of Preston's paternal instinct, before being ruthlessly suppressed. They were never mine. Just more lies. Garrett spent his nights poring over information Lawrence brought him. Financial records of the Harlow family, surveillance reports, photographs. He learned that Vanessa had moved in with Dominic 6 months after Preston's disappearance. Diana had suffered another, more severe stroke and now required full-time care. Aubrey and Bradley had divorced, with Aubrey gaining custody of their children plus Noah, who they claimed was biologically Bradley's according to the arrangement. Most importantly, Garrett discovered that his disappearance had damaged the family financially. Without Preston's business acumen, Frontier Solutions had floundered, eventually being sold at a fraction of its worth. The estate Richard had left, primarily to Vanessa rather than his children, was dwindling due to mismanagement and Dominic's gambling habit. After 18 months in isolation, Garrett was ready for the next phase. He traveled to Brazil, where he spent 6 months with a former Israeli intelligence operative named Mira Voss, learning the finer points of disguise, infiltration, and psychological manipulation. "Why are you doing this?" Mira had asked during their final session. "Revenge rarely brings the satisfaction people seek." "It's not about satisfaction," Garrett had replied. "It's about justice. Some debts can only be paid in pain." Over the next 3 years, Garrett rebuilt a new empire, this one based on information rather than cybersecurity. His company, Parallax Intelligence, specialized in corporate counterespionage, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to foreign governments. Using the skills he'd learned from Mira, he operated in the shadows, his true identity known only to Lawrence, who had left Frontier Solutions to become his second-in-command. By the 5th year of his new life, Garrett had amassed more wealth than Preston ever had, along with a network of individuals who owed him favors: law enforcement officials, judges, hackers, mercenaries. Each would play a role in what he had come to call the reckoning. In year 7, Garrett received news that Dominic had died in what appeared to be a drunk driving accident. For a moment, he considered abandoning his plans. One target was already gone. But then he saw the obituary photo. Vanessa standing beside Dominic's grave, her arm around Caleb, now a young man of 18. Behind them stood Diana in a wheelchair, Aubrey, and Bradley, who had apparently reconciled with his ex-wife. They stood together like a unified family, having simply replaced Preston and now Dominic. "The plan continues," Garrett told Lawrence. "Dominic's death changes nothing. They all still need to pay." Over the next 3 years, Garrett meticulously positioned his pieces on the board. Parallax Intelligence opened an office in Denver, though Garrett himself remained unseen, operating through proxies. He purchased the building that housed Vanessa's interior design business through a shell corporation. He donated heavily to the private school Lily attended. He arranged for one of his operatives to befriend Noah, now 15 and struggling with behavioral issues. Most crucially, Garrett cultivated a relationship with Caleb, who had followed in his father's footsteps and was studying computer science. Using an online persona, Garrett became Caleb's mentor, guiding his education and gradually steering him toward an internship at a company Garrett controlled. 10 years after Preston Harlow disappeared, Garrett Reed returned to Denver, his appearance so altered that no one connected him to the man who had vanished a decade earlier. He purchased a penthouse overlooking the city, installed state-of-the-art security systems, and prepared for the final phase of his decade-long plan. "Are you sure about this?" Lawrence asked as they stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. "Once we start, there's no going back." Garrett's reflection in the glass showed no emotion. "I've been gone for 10 years. But not a single day passed when I wasn't planning this moment. They destroyed Preston Harlow. Now Garrett Reed will destroy them." Chapter 5. The Aftermath of Absence. While Garrett Reed had been building his new life and plotting his revenge, the lives of those who had betrayed Preston Harlow had taken various turns, none of them particularly prosperous. Vanessa had initially maintained a facade of the grieving, abandoned wife, giving tearful interviews on local news and creating a social media campaign to find Preston. Behind closed doors, however, she had quickly moved in with Dominic, sliding seamlessly from father to son in the twisted dynamic of the Harlow family. Without Preston's financial acumen, Frontier Solutions had floundered. The company's value had plummeted when several major clients, suspicious of the sudden leadership change, had taken their business elsewhere. Eventually, Vanessa and Dominic had been forced to sell the company for a fraction of its worth. The money from the sale and Preston's remaining accessible assets had funded a lavish lifestyle for a few years, but Dominic's gambling addiction and poor business decisions had steadily eroded their wealth. By the 5th year after Preston's disappearance, they had been forced to sell the Tudor home and move into a much smaller property on the outskirts of Denver. Dominic's death in year 7, drunkenly wrapping his sports car around a tree after a night of heavy losses at an underground poker game, had accelerated the family's decline. Without his income from a middling sales job and with substantial gambling debts coming due, Vanessa had found herself truly struggling for the first time since her youth. Diana, now confined to a wheelchair and requiring constant care after her second stroke, had moved in with Vanessa, her medical expenses draining what remained of Richard's estate. The once proud matriarch who had facilitated the betrayal of her son now depended entirely on the goodwill of those around her, her sharp mind dulled by stroke damage and medication. Aubrey and Bradley had divorced shortly after Preston's disappearance, unable to maintain their facade of a happy marriage once the family's secrets began causing financial strain. But they had reconciled after Dominic's death, partially for practical reasons. Neither could afford to live alone anymore, and partially to present a united front as the family faced mounting difficulties. The children had perhaps suffered the most in Preston's absence. Caleb, who had been 11 when Preston vanished, had spent years angry and confused, acting out in school and eventually developing a keen interest in finding his father, unaware of his true biological parentage. Though intellectually gifted, particularly with computers, his emotional issues had made his adolescence turbulent. Lily, 8 when Preston disappeared, had withdrawn into herself, becoming painfully shy and anxious. She had found solace in art, developing considerable talent as a painter, creating dark, disturbing images that worried her teachers. Noah, only 5 when Preston left, barely remembered the man who had raised him for his first years. Influenced by the chaotic home environment and the revolving door of father figures, he had developed severe behavioral problems, getting into fights at school and, by 15, beginning to experiment with drugs and alcohol. Through his extensive surveillance network, Garrett had watched these developments with clinical detachment, noting vulnerabilities and pressure points to exploit. He had particularly focused on the children, recognizing that despite not being biologically his, they represented both his greatest weakness and potentially his most effective weapons against those who had wronged him. In the months before initiating his plan, Garrett had learned several key pieces of information. Vanessa had opened a small interior design business that was struggling to stay afloat. Aubrey had taken a job as an administrator at Caleb's former high school. Bradley was working as a manager at a car dealership owned by a man who owed Garrett a significant favor. Diana's medical care was becoming unaffordable, forcing the family to consider nursing home options they couldn't actually afford. Most importantly, Garrett discovered through his online mentorship of Caleb that the young man had been searching for Preston for years, compiling information and following dead-end leads. Caleb had created a detailed digital archive of Preston's life, business dealings, and disappearance, an investigation that had brought him uncomfortably close to uncovering certain aspects of Garrett's new identity. "The boy is clever," Garrett had told Lawrence after reviewing Caleb's latest search patterns. "He's using advanced data mining techniques I didn't expect. He might actually have found me if I hadn't been so careful with covering my tracks." "Is that admiration I hear?" Lawrence had asked, studying his friend's face. "Observation," Garrett had replied flatly. "He has skills I can use. And he clearly hasn't accepted the family's lies about me. That makes him useful." As the 10th anniversary of Preston's disappearance approached, Garrett had made his final preparations. His surveillance indicated that Vanessa was planning a somber memorial service, a public declaration that she was finally accepting that Preston was likely dead, allowing her to access certain estate funds that had been held in trust. The timing was perfect. Just as they prepared to officially put Preston Harlow to rest, Garrett Reed would emerge from the shadows to dismantle what remained of their lives, piece by carefully calculated piece. Chapter 6: Architects of Reckoning. On a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 10 years and 1 day after Preston Harlow had disappeared, Lawrence Patterson sat across from Garrett Reed in the secure conference room of the Parallax Intelligence Denver office. Spread across the table between them were dossiers, photographs, and tablet screens displaying surveillance footage. "The memorial service is scheduled for this Saturday," Lawrence said, sliding a formal invitation across the table. "Vanessa's calling it a celebration of life and closure. She's invited Preston's former clients, employees, everyone who might contribute to her support fund for the children's education." Garrett's mouth twisted in a cold smile. Always the opportunist. "Even my death is a financial opportunity for her." "There's more," Lawrence continued. "She's filed the final paperwork to have Preston legally declared dead. Once processed, she'll have access to the insurance policies and the remaining trust funds you couldn't liquidate before leaving." "Perfect timing," Garrett replied, tapping a file folder with one finger. "Everything's in place on our end. The shell companies own controlling interests in every business they depend on. Their phones, emails, and homes are comprehensively monitored. The financial traps are set. He opened the folder, revealing a complex flowchart connecting various entities to the remaining members of the Harlow family. Phase 1 begins tomorrow. We start with Diana. The mother, Lawrence noted. The enabler. Exactly. Her medical care is their most significant financial burden. Tomorrow, her primary physician, now on our payroll, will inform them that her condition requires specialized treatment only available at the Aspen Grove Care Center, which we acquired last year, Lawrence added. Yes, they'll perceive it as fortunate that the facility is willing to accept Diana despite their financial situation. In reality, we'll be gathering evidence and testimony about her role in the conspiracy while controlling every aspect of her care. Garrett turned to another page in the dossier. Next is Bradley. His dealership will be audited by the state commission tomorrow, an anonymous tip about fraudulent practices. His boss, who owes me, will offer him a choice: resignation with no references or criminal charges. That leaves him unemployed right when the family needs income the most, Lawrence observed. Precisely. Simultaneously, Aubrey will receive notice that her position at the school is being eliminated due to budget cuts. The superintendent made that decision after receiving a generous donation to the athletic program from an anonymous benefactor with one stipulation. And Vanessa's business? The building has been sold. The new owner, another shell corporation, is tripling the rent. She'll have 30 days to vacate unless she can afford the increase, which we know she can't. Lawrence studied his friend's face, finding no trace of hesitation or remorse. And the children? Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, the barest hint of his former self. Caleb is different. He's been searching for the truth. For me, he deserves a chance. And the others? Noah will be approached by one of our operatives who's befriended him. He'll be offered a chance to earn quick money-running packages. Nothing illegal yet, just testing his willingness to skirt the law. Lily's art scholarship to the summer program she applied for will mysteriously fall through, crushing her one chance to escape the family dynamic. These are just the opening moves, Lawrence noted. Yes, small pressures that will force them together, increase tensions, make them desperate. When the memorial service happens, they'll already be showing cracks. Garrett leaned back in his chair. That's when I'll make my first appearance. As Garrett Reed, the reclusive business magnate. Yes, a potential client for Vanessa's struggling design firm. A beacon of financial hope when they need it most. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. And the endgame? What happens when you've infiltrated their lives completely? Garrett stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline where his former home had once been visible. I spent 10 years planning this, Lawrence. Vengeance isn't a single act. It's a process. First, I take away their security. Then, their dignity. Next, their trust in each other. Finally, I offer them a choice. What choice? Garrett turned, his expression coldly determined. The same one they gave me. Live with the consequences of their betrayal, or lose everything trying to escape it. Lawrence had known this man for many years, first as Preston, now as Garrett. He recognized the implacable resolve in his friend's eyes. And if they discover who you really are? A predatory smile spread across Garrett's face. That, old friend, is the point. The fear isn't in the blade. It's in watching it descend, knowing it's coming, being powerless to stop it. I want them to realize, in their final moments of comfort, exactly who is dismantling their world and why. He returned to the table, gathering the documents into neat piles. Tomorrow we begin. By Saturday's memorial service, they'll already be feeling the ground shift beneath their feet. By next month, their lives will bear no resemblance to what they know now. And by year's end, they'll understand exactly what it means to lose everything you thought was yours. The two men reviewed each element of the plan again, checking contingencies and fail-safes. As midnight approached, Garrett sealed the documents in a secure case. 10 years ago, they destroyed a decent man who trusted them, he said quietly. They didn't just take his wife, his children, his dignity. They took his capacity for mercy. That's their true crime, and for that, there can be no forgiveness. Lawrence nodded solemnly. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow, Garrett agreed. The ghost they're planning to memorialize comes back to haunt them. Chapter 7. Emergence. The morning of Diana Harlow's medical consultation dawned cold and clear. Garrett watched through surveillance cameras as Vanessa helped the frail woman into their modest sedan, the stress evident on both their faces. Even from a distance, it was clear that the years had not been kind to Vanessa. Her once glamorous appearance now showed the strain of financial hardship and the bitterness of thwarted ambition. Dr. Elise Weber, carefully vetted and generously compensated by Garrett, delivered the news with practiced compassion. Diana's condition required specialized care that could only be provided at the Aspen Grove Care Center, an exclusive facility with a typical waiting list of months. Fortunately, due to Dr. Weber's connections, a place had just become available. But the cost? Vanessa protested, her voice tight with panic. Our insurance won't cover a facility like Aspen Grove. Actually, Dr. Weber replied, consulting her tablet. I've spoken with their financial department. Given Mrs. Harlow's specific condition, they're offering a substantial discount. They have a special program for patients with her particular needs. The relief on Vanessa's face was palpable, unaware that this special program existed solely for this moment, funded entirely by the man she had betrayed. Simultaneously across town, Bradley Williams received a summons to his dealer principal's office. An hour later, he emerged, ashen-faced and unemployed, his career in automotive sales effectively over due to allegations of fraud he hadn't committed. By noon, Aubrey had been called into an emergency budget meeting at her school, emerging with 2 weeks' notice and a paltry severance package. By the time Vanessa returned home from the doctor's appointment, her phone was ringing with the news that her design studio's lease would not be renewed under the new ownership. The family that had once orchestrated an elaborate deception against Preston Harlow was now experiencing a coordinated dismantling of their lives, orchestrated by a ghost. 3 days before the memorial service, with the family reeling from these successive blows, Garrett Reed made his first physical appearance in their lives. Vanessa, desperate to save her design business, had been reviewing potential new locations, all well beyond her budget, when she received a call from a real estate agent representing a very exclusive client. Mr. Reed is new to Denver, the agent explained, and requires assistance designing his penthouse. He specifically requested your portfolio after seeing your work online. He's willing to pay a premium for the right designer. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, and Vanessa grabbed it without question. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at Garrett's penthouse. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in her most professional attire, a suit that had seen better days but still projected the image of success she desperately needed to convey. Garrett watched her through the security feed as she composed herself in the elevator, practicing a confident smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she stepped into the penthouse foyer, he deliberately kept her waiting for precisely 7 minutes, the same amount of time she had once made Preston wait before their first date, a detail he had never forgotten. When he finally emerged from his office to greet her, he presented the perfect picture of wealth and confidence. Tailored suit, expertly colored hair, trimmed beard, and subtle cosmetic alterations that changed his facial structure just enough to prevent recognition. The man who had once been Preston Harlow extended his hand to the woman who had betrayed him and smiled. Mrs. Harlow, a pleasure to meet you. I'm Garrett Reed. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes as they shook hands. Not recognition, but an odd sense of familiarity quickly dismissed. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Reed. And please, call me Vanessa. Vanessa, then. Come in. I've prepared some thoughts on what I'm looking for. For the next hour, Garrett led her through the empty penthouse, describing his vision in terms that deliberately echoed preferences Preston had once expressed, subtle callbacks that registered subconsciously with Vanessa, causing moments of confusion she couldn't quite place. Is something wrong? He asked when she paused, looking perplexed after he described wanting the same obscure Danish furniture brand Preston had once favored. No, I'm sorry. You just remind me of someone. Your tastes are similar to my late husband's. Late husband? Garrett feigned ignorance. I wasn't aware you were widowed. It's complicated. He disappeared 10 years ago. We're actually holding a memorial service this weekend. After all this time, it seems best to find closure. How tragic, Garrett replied, watching her face carefully. You must have loved him very much. The flash of guilt across her features was brief but unmistakable. Yes, it's been difficult. By the end of the meeting, Garrett had offered her the design contract at double her usual rate, with a generous advance that would temporarily solve her most pressing financial problems. As she left, visibly relieved and already making plans for the money, Garrett placed a final hook. "I understand you have children," he said casually. "The oldest is in college." "Caleb, yes. Computer science at Colorado State. He's brilliant with technology." "Interesting. My company is always looking for promising interns. Perhaps you could have him send his resume? The position pays quite well." The naked opportunism in Vanessa's expression as she eagerly agreed told Garrett everything he needed to know about her character, still willing to use anyone, including her children, for financial gain. After she left, Lawrence emerged from the monitoring room where he'd observed the entire interaction. "She didn't recognize you." "No," Garrett replied, loosening his tie. She saw what she expected to see, a wealthy potential client, a solution to her problems. She never truly saw Preston either, only what he could provide. "The memorial service is Saturday. Will you attend?" Garrett's smile was cold. "Oh yes. After all, what kind of person would miss their own funeral?" The next 2 days saw Garrett implementing the next phase of his plan. An anonymous donor offered Caleb an interview for a prestigious internship at a tech firm, actually a Parallax subsidiary. Noah, increasingly desperate as the family's financial situation deteriorated, accepted the offer from Garrett's operative to earn quick money through increasingly suspicious deliveries. Only Lily remained untouched, her quiet suffering noted but temporarily left undisturbed in Garrett's calculations. On Saturday morning, the day of Preston Harlow's memorial service, Garrett stood in his penthouse dressing room, studying his reflection. Today he would come as close as he dared to revealing his true identity, close enough to plant seeds of doubt, but not enough to expose his hand prematurely. "Are you ready for this?" Lawrence asked, adjusting his own tie. Garrett fastened a distinctive watch to his wrist, the same model, though not the exact watch, that Preston had habitually worn. "I've been ready for 10 years. The memorial service was held at an event center that had once been prestigious but had declined in recent years, a fitting metaphor for the family itself. Garrett and Lawrence arrived fashionably late, entering discreetly during a childhood friend's eulogy for a man they believed long dead. Vanessa spotted them immediately, her face brightening at the sight of her wealthy new client. After the service concluded, she made her way to them through the sparse crowd. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected. How did you know about the service?" "Denver's business community is small," Garrett replied smoothly. "When I heard about your loss, I thought it appropriate to pay respects. This must be a difficult day for you and your family." "Yes, though it's also a relief to finally have closure," Vanessa said, the practiced grief in her voice almost convincing. "Please, let me introduce you to my family." As Vanessa led him through introductions, Garrett observed each family member closely. Aubrey, tense and distracted, clearly worried about her employment situation. Bradley, reeking of alcohol at barely noon, his forced smile betraying his anxiety. Diana in her wheelchair, her eyes cloudy with medication but occasionally showing flashes of the calculating woman who had facilitated her son's betrayal. Then came the children, no longer children, but young adults shaped by a decade of lies. Noah, sullen and disinterested, barely acknowledging the introduction. Lily, watchful and wary, her artist's eye taking in details others missed, including the way Garrett's attention lingered on certain photos of Preston displayed around the room. And finally Caleb, now 21, with Preston's height and bearing but Dominic's features, a constant reminder of the betrayal. Unlike the others, Caleb studied Garrett intently, as if trying to place him. "You look familiar," Caleb said after they shook hands. "Have we met before?" "I don't believe so," Garrett replied. "Though I understand from your mother that you're studying computer science. I was just telling her my company might have an internship opportunity." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "What company is that?" "Parallax Intelligence. We specialize in information security, not unlike your father's former company." The reference was deliberate, and Garrett watched as it registered with Caleb. The young man's analytical mind was already making connections, sensing patterns where others saw only coincidence. As the event concluded, Garrett approached Vanessa with a final turn of the screw. "I couldn't help but notice the financial appeal for the Children's Education Fund. Allow me to contribute." He handed her a check that made her eyes widen. "Consider it an advance on our project together." "This is incredibly generous," she stammered, staring at the figure. "I believe in supporting families," Garrett replied, his voice taking on just the faintest echo of Preston's cadence, "especially those who have suffered unexpected losses." As he turned to leave, he felt Caleb's eyes following him, the only one who sensed that something wasn't quite right about Garrett Reed. That suspicion was exactly as he had planned. In the car leaving the memorial, Lawrence glanced at his friend. "The son suspects something." "Good," Garrett replied, watching the family through the tinted window as they departed. "Let him wonder. Let him search. The truth is a weapon that cuts both ways. It will free him from their lies while destroying what remains of their foundation." The first phase of Garrett's return was complete. He had inserted himself into their lives, established his presence, and planted the seeds of both hope and suspicion. Now the real dismantling could begin. Chapter 8. Disintegration. In the weeks following Preston's memorial service, the Harlow family's situation deteriorated rapidly, each new disaster seeming unrelated but actually part of Garrett's meticulously orchestrated plan. Diana moved into Aspen Grove Care Center, where her primary caregiver, hand-selected by Garrett, began subtly encouraging her to talk about the past, recording her increasingly unfiltered confessions about the arrangement, as her medication dosages were carefully adjusted to maximize lucidity during these conversations. Bradley's job search proved futile as every promising lead mysteriously fell through at the last moment. Aubrey, equally unsuccessful in finding new employment, began to blame him for their financial struggles, reigniting the tensions that had led to their previous divorce. Vanessa threw herself into the penthouse design project, eager to please her wealthy client, unaware that every decision she made was being carefully documented and cross-referenced against things she had once said to Preston, building a comprehensive record of her lies and contradictions. But it was through the children that Garrett executed the most devastating phase of his plan. Caleb, increasingly suspicious about the similarities between Garrett Reed and the father he barely remembered, began investigating his new employer's background. Garrett deliberately left digital breadcrumbs that led Caleb down carefully constructed pathways, each revelation bringing him closer to a truth even more devastating than he imagined. Meanwhile, Noah had graduated from delivering packages to more serious criminal activities for Garrett's operative, believing he was working for a minor drug dealer, but actually being manipulated into gathering compromising information on his own family members. Only Lily remained somewhat protected, her natural reticence keeping her at the periphery of Garrett's machinations, until he identified her as the family's emotional center, the one person they all still tried to shield from the harshest realities of their situation. 6 weeks after the memorial service, Garrett invited Vanessa to the penthouse to discuss progress on the design project. When she arrived, she found him reviewing documents at his desk. "Vanessa, thank you for coming," he said, not looking up immediately. "I've been examining your proposals, and I have some concerns." The shift in his tone, from warm client to cold evaluator, was deliberate, and he saw her posture stiffen in response. "Concerns? I thought you were pleased with the direction." "The direction, yes. The honesty, no." He finally looked up, allowing a hint of Preston's mannerisms to show through his Garrett facade. "You've been inflating costs, adding unnecessary fees, and generally attempting to extract maximum profit while delivering minimum value." "That's not true," she protested, though the flush across her cheeks betrayed her. "Isn't it?" He slid a folder across the desk. "These are the actual costs from your suppliers. I had my people check. You've marked everything up by 200 to 300%. It was true, of course. Desperate for money, Vanessa had reverted to the same opportunistic behavior she had always exhibited. "Mr. Reed, there are standard industry markups." "Save it," he cut her off. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in honesty. Something I believe has been in short supply in your life for quite some time." Her expression shifted from defensive to wary. "What do you mean?" Garrett leaned forward. "I know about the arrangement, Vanessa." The color drained from her face. "What arrangement?" "The one you had with Richard Harlow. The one that continued with Dominic after Richard died. The one that made you marry a man you never loved and bear children that weren't his." She recoiled as if struck. "How could you possibly?" "I know everything," he said, deliberately echoing the note Preston had left a decade earlier. "About Richard. About Dominic. about how you and Diana and the others conspired to use Preston Harlow as your personal ATM while living your twisted version of a family life behind his back. Vanessa stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. I don't know what you're talking about, but this meeting is over. Find yourself another designer. Sit down, Garrett said, his voice suddenly carrying the full authority that had once made Preston a respected CEO. To his satisfaction, she responded automatically to the command, sinking back into her chair. The meeting will end when I say it ends. He tapped a key on his laptop, and the room filled with Diana's voice from a recording made at Aspen Grove. Preston never knew. That was the rule Richard established. Preston earned the money, and we all benefited. Vanessa was Richard's from the beginning, but she played her part well. Vanessa's hands trembled as the recording continued, her mother-in-law's voice detailing every aspect of their decade-long deception. Where did you get that? She whispered when Garrett finally silenced the playback. I have everything, Vanessa. Recordings, documents, DNA tests. Enough evidence to expose every member of your family for what they really are. What do you want? Money? I don't have any. I don't want your money, Garrett interrupted. I want your cooperation. Cooperation in what? Garrett smiled coldly. Justice. Restitution. Call it what you will. You and your family stole a man's life. His love, his children, his trust. Now you're going to help me recover what was taken. Why do you care about Preston Harlow? She asked, suspicion beginning to dawn. Who are you really? Instead of answering directly, Garrett slid another document across the desk, a contract. You're going to sign this. It transfers ownership of your design business to me. You'll continue working as if nothing has changed, but all profits will be directed to accounts I control. That's blackmail. No, Vanessa. It's the beginning of your education and loss. Sign it. Or tomorrow morning, every member of your family receives copies of Diana's full confession, along with details of Noah's recent criminal activities, which, I should mention, have been carefully documented by law enforcement contacts who owe me favors. Her hand shook as she signed, hatred burning in her eyes. You won't get away with this. I already have, Garrett replied. Just as you thought you had gotten away with destroying Preston Harlow. As Vanessa left, visibly shaken, Garrett made a call. Lawrence, proceed with Caleb. That evening, Caleb Harlow received an encrypted email containing fragments of security footage from his father's final days, carefully edited clips showing Richard, Dominic, and Vanessa in damning situations, along with portions of Diana's recorded confession. The email came with a simple message. The man you've been searching for didn't disappear. He was erased. Keep looking. Simultaneously, Bradley returned home to find his personal computer had been hacked, his browser history now filled with searches for divorce attorneys and child custody laws. When confronted by an already suspicious Aubrey, their argument escalated to the point where she threw him out of the house, unwittingly fulfilling another step in Garrett's plan to isolate each family member. The next morning, Noah was picked up by police, an anonymous tip having connected him to the increasingly illegal activities he'd been manipulated into performing. With no money for a lawyer, he faced serious charges that threatened his future and further strained the family's dwindling resources. Only Lily remained temporarily untouched, watching as her family disintegrated around her, using her art to process the chaos. Unbeknownst to her, Garrett had been monitoring her work through surveillance of her social media accounts, recognizing in her dark, symbolic paintings an unconscious understanding of the truth her family had hidden for so long. 3 days after Vanessa signed away her business, Garrett arranged to meet Caleb at a coffee shop near his university. The young man who arrived was haggard, sleepless, his eyes burning with questions. Who are you really? Caleb demanded without preamble as he sat down. What do you know about my father? Which father are we discussing? Garrett asked mildly. Preston Harlow, who raised you. Or Dominic Harlow, who fathered you biologically. Caleb's face paled. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Garrett slid a folder across the table. Inside was a complete DNA analysis comparing Caleb's genetic material, collected from a water bottle during his job interview, with Preston's and Dominic's, obtained from medical records Garrett had acquired years earlier. Your entire life is built on a lie, Caleb, Garrett said as the young man stared at the irrefutable evidence. Your mother married Preston while involved with his father, Richard. After Richard died, she continued the arrangement with Dominic. You are Dominic's biological son, though Preston raised you believing you were his. No, Caleb whispered, but Garrett could see the pieces falling into place in his analytical mind. The family resemblances that had never quite made sense, the tensions he'd observed but couldn't explain, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Everyone knew except Preston, Garrett continued mercilessly. Your grandmother, your aunt and uncle, everyone. They called it the arrangement. Preston provided the money, the stability, the respectable front, while the others shared everything else. How do you know all this? Who are you? Caleb demanded again, his voice breaking. Garrett leaned forward, allowing more of Preston to show through his constructed identity than ever before. Someone who believes Preston Harlow deserves justice. The question is, do you agree? If what you're saying is true, it is. You've seen the evidence. Then my entire family betrayed him. Betrayed me too, by lying my whole life. Caleb's expression hardened. What kind of justice are you talking about? The complete dismantling of the lives they built on those lies, Garrett replied. I've already begun. Your grandmother's confessions are being recorded daily. Your mother's business now belongs to me. Your Uncle Bradley is out of the house, and your brother faces criminal charges. You're destroying my family. It wasn't quite an accusation, more a statement of fact. They destroyed themselves the moment they decided to use Preston Harlow as their unwitting benefactor while betraying him in the most fundamental ways possible. Garrett studied Caleb's face. You have a choice now. Help me complete what I've started, or be destroyed alongside them. Why would I help you? Because you've spent years searching for the truth about Preston Harlow. Because you're the only one who ever truly cared what happened to him. Because despite not being his biological son, you're the only one who inherited his sense of justice. Caleb was silent for a long moment, internal conflict visible on his face. If I help you, what happens to Lily and Noah? They're innocent in this. Are they? Noah is following directly in your family's footsteps, using others for personal gain with no regard for consequences. As for Lily, Garrett paused. Her innocence is a matter of perspective, but I'm willing to negotiate their futures based on your cooperation. I want to know who you really are first, Caleb insisted. No more evasions. Garrett considered the young man before him. Intelligent, principled despite his upbringing, unwilling to proceed without full information. In that moment, he recognized something of himself in Caleb, despite the lack of biological connection. Very well, he said finally. But not here. He wrote an address on a napkin. Come to this location tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. Then you'll understand everything. As Caleb left, visibly shaken but determined, Lawrence approached from a nearby table where he'd been observing. Are you sure about this? Revealing yourself to him could compromise everything. Or it could be the key to the final phase, Garrett replied, watching Caleb's retreating figure. Either way, it's time he understood exactly what his family destroyed, and who has returned to collect the debt. Chapter 9. Revelation and Retribution. The address Garrett had given Caleb led to an anonymous warehouse on the outskirts of Denver. Inside, the cavernous space had been transformed into a comprehensive archive of Preston Harlow's life and the decade-long development of Garrett Reed's vengeance. Photographs, documents, surveillance footage, and physical evidence displayed with museum-like precision. At precisely 8 p.m., Caleb arrived, tension evident in every line of his body. Garrett watched him through security cameras as he hesitantly entered the building, taking in the enormous wall of evidence before him. What is this place? Caleb called out, his voice echoing. Garrett emerged from the shadows, dressed not as the polished businessman Garrett Reed, but in clothing reminiscent of Preston Harlow's style. He had removed the subtle facial prosthetics that altered his appearance, and his hair was styled as Preston had once worn it. This, he said in Preston's voice rather than Garrett's affected deeper tone, is the truth you've been searching for. Recognition dawned slowly on Caleb's face, disbelief warring with the evidence of his eyes. It's not possible. 10 years ago, Garrett continued, approaching steadily. Preston Harlow discovered that his entire life was a lie. His wife, his father, his mother, his siblings, all conspiring to use him while betraying him in the most intimate ways possible. Even the children he loved weren't his own. You can't be him, Caleb whispered. My father disappeared. He's dead. Preston Harlow is dead, Garrett agreed. He died the night he discovered the truth. In his place, I was born, Garrett Reed, architect of the reckoning your family is now experiencing. Caleb staggered slightly, leaning against a display case for support. All this time, you've been alive? Watching us? Planning this? He gestured at the extensive evidence around them. Not just planning, becoming someone else entirely. Someone capable of delivering the justice Preston was too decent to contemplate. Garrett moved to a large display screen, activating it to show footage of Richard Harlow's deathbed confession. It began here, with these words. Then the discovery of the group chat on Richard's phone. Finally, DNA tests confirming what Preston already knew, that none of his children were biologically his. Why didn't you just confront them then? Why disappear for 10 years? Because simple confrontation would have changed nothing. They would have denied, minimized, shifted blame, and ultimately, Preston would have forgiven, because that was his nature. Garrett's expression hardened. I needed to become someone else. Someone they couldn't manipulate or appeal to for mercy. Someone with the resources and resolve to dismantle their lives as they had destroyed Preston's. Caleb studied the man before him, the stranger who was somehow also the father figure he had spent years searching for. What happens now? Now you decide where you stand. With the family that lied to you your entire life, or with the man who raised you despite knowing, on some level, that you weren't his. You knew? Even before the DNA tests. Preston suspected, Garrett admitted. You have Dominic's features, his temperament in some ways. But Preston chose to love you anyway, to be the father Dominic never intended to be. That choice was the one genuine thing in his fraudulent life. The revelation visibly affected Caleb, tears forming in his eyes. I always felt different from them. From Mom, from Uncle Dominic, from all of them. I never understood why. Because despite not sharing blood, you and Preston shared something more fundamental, a moral compass. An understanding of right and wrong that the others lack entirely. Garrett approached, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. That's why I'm offering you a choice now. What choice? Help me complete what I've started. Help me expose every lie, recover what was stolen, and ensure your family faces the full consequences of their actions. Or walk away now, back to the people who have deceived you since birth, and share in their fate. Caleb was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had learned. Finally, he asked, what about Lily and Noah? They're still my siblings, even if not biologically related to you. They're pawns in a game their parents created, Garrett replied. Their fate depends on the choices they make now, just as yours does. And Mom, Grandma, the others. They made their choices years ago, repeatedly, knowingly. Their fate is sealed. Garrett's expression was implacable. The only variables now are you and your siblings, whether you perpetuate their patterns or break free from them. After a long moment, Caleb straightened, wiping away his tears. I want to know everything, the whole truth. Then I'll decide. For the next 3 hours, Garrett walked Caleb through the complete history. Preston's marriage to Vanessa, the arrangement orchestrated by Richard, the decade of betrayal, and finally, the elaborate transformation into Garrett Reed and the meticulously planned revenge. When he finished, dawn was breaking outside the warehouse windows, casting long shadows through the evidence of 2 lives, one destroyed, one created from its ashes. Tomorrow, Garrett said, is the final phase. Everyone will be gathered at Aspen Grove for Diana's birthday celebration, the last social event they'll experience as a family. I'll be there as Garrett Reed, potential benefactor for Diana's care. At precisely 2 p.m., all the evidence will be delivered simultaneously to each of them. Digital copies to their devices, physical copies handed to them by my operatives. Their public exposure will be complete and irrefutable. And after that, Caleb asked, after that, they lose everything. The remaining assets Preston couldn't liquidate before disappearing will be legally reclaimed through mechanisms I've spent years establishing. Diana's care will continue only at my discretion. Vanessa's design business, now legally mine, will be dissolved. The house, also now legally mine through shell companies, will be repossessed. Their reputations, careers, and futures will be systematically dismantled. You really have thought of everything. For 10 years, it was all I thought about. Garrett studied Caleb carefully. The question remains, where will you stand when it happens? Caleb took a deep breath. With the truth. With you, Fath. He stopped, uncertain what to call this complex figure before him. Preston Harlow was your father in every way that matters, Garrett said quietly. But Preston is gone. I'm what remains. Then I stand with you. Garrett. The following day, Diana Harlow's birthday celebration at Aspen Grove Care Center began as a subdued affair. Financial pressures, Noah's legal troubles, and the growing tensions between family members had cast a pall over what should have been a celebration of the matriarch's 75th birthday. Vanessa arrived first, her tight smile betraying her anxiety. Since her confrontation with Garrett, she had been desperately searching for ways to counteract whatever he was planning, but each avenue had proven futile. Aubrey and Bradley arrived separately, still at odds following their recent arguments. Lily came with Aubrey, quiet and observant as always, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like armor. Noah, released on bail pending his court date, slouched and last, resentful and suspicious of everyone. Only Caleb was missing, having texted that he was running late but on his way. In reality, he was with Garrett, reviewing the final elements of the day's revelations. At precisely 1:30 p.m., Garrett Reed arrived at the care center, impeccably dressed and bearing expensive flowers for Diana. The family's reaction to his appearance was telling. Vanessa's obvious fear, Aubrey and Bradley's confusion about his presence, Noah's sullen disinterest, and Lily's quietly perceptive observation. Mr. Reed, Vanessa said, struggling to maintain composure. This is a private family gathering. Of course, Garrett replied smoothly. I just wanted to pay my respects to Mrs. Harlow on her special day. The staff mentioned she doesn't receive many visitors, which seems a shame for someone who was once the center of such an involved family dynamic. The deliberate emphasis made Vanessa pale. Diana, however, seemed genuinely pleased by the attention from the handsome, wealthy visitor. Her faculties cleared today due to Garrett's instructions to her caregivers regarding her medication schedule. For the next half hour, Garrett engaged in seemingly pleasant conversation with the family, each interaction laden with double meanings that only Vanessa fully grasped. As 2 p.m. approached, he checked his watch, the signal to Lawrence, who was monitoring remotely. At exactly 2 p.m., every phone in the room chimed simultaneously with incoming messages. Additionally, care center staff, all secretly employed by Garrett, entered bearing sealed envelopes for each family member. What's this? Aubrey asked, opening her envelope as the others checked their phones. Inside each package, digital and physical, was a comprehensive dossier detailing each person's specific role in the decade-long betrayal of Preston Harlow, supported by irrefutable evidence including photographs, recordings, witness statements, and DNA test results. The room fell into stunned silence as they processed what they were seeing, each family member confronted with their own crimes alongside those of the others, a complete exposure of the arrangement in all its sordid detail. What is the meaning of this? Diana finally demanded, her frail voice quavering as she stared at the damning evidence before her. Justice, Garrett replied simply. Long delayed, but finally delivered. Who are you? Vanessa whispered, though the truth was dawning in her horrified expression. At that moment, Caleb entered the room, moving to stand beside Garrett in a clear statement of allegiance. He's the man you all betrayed, Caleb said calmly. The man whose life you stole. Garrett smiled coldly, allowing his carefully constructed facade to fall away completely for the first time in a decade. Preston Harlow is dead, he said in his natural voice. He died the night he discovered what you had all done to him. I am what remains, what you created through your betrayal. The shock on their faces was everything he had imagined during his years of planning. Diana's hands trembled so violently that her papers fell to the floor. Vanessa seemed to physically shrink, the weight of her actions finally crushing her practiced poise. Aubrey began to sob, while Bradley simply stared, slack-jawed with disbelief. Only Lily and Noah, who had been children when Preston disappeared, showed different reactions. Noah angry and defensive, Lily strangely calm, as if she had somehow always known this moment would come. It's not possible, Aubrey finally stuttered. Preston disappeared. He's dead. Legally, yes. Preston Harlow no longer exists. But I do. Garrett gestured to the evidence they each held. And unlike Preston, I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't show mercy to those who deserve none. What do you want? Bradley asked, his voice hoarse. Money? We don't have any. No, you don't, Garrett agreed. Because I've systematically dismantled every financial resource you had. The house you're living in? I own it now. Your jobs? Gone by my orchestration. Your reputations? Destroyed by evidence I've collected. Your future prospects? Eliminated through networks I've spent a decade cultivating. He turned to Vanessa. Your design business now belongs to me, as you already know. By tomorrow, it will cease to exist, along with any income it provided. To Diana, your continued care here depends entirely on my goodwill, which, I should mention, is non-existent. This facility is one of many I acquired specifically for this moment. To Aubrey and Bradley, every prospective employer in Denver has received detailed information about your roles in this arrangement. You'll find employment opportunities suddenly scarce. Finally, to Noah, your legal troubles are just beginning. The activities you've been involved in carry significant penalties, all documented extensively by individuals in my employ. You can't do this, Vanessa protested weakly. We have rights. Rights? Garrett laughed without humor. Did Preston have the right to know his wife was sleeping with his father? Did he have the right to know the children he raised weren't his? Did he have the right to a family that wasn't systematically exploiting him? His voice rose with each question. You forfeited any claim to rights or mercy the moment you chose to destroy a decent man for your own selfish purposes. Caleb stepped forward then. I've seen all the evidence. I know everything now. How you used him, how you lied to me my entire life about who my father was, how you created this twisted arrangement and never once considered the damage you were doing. Caleb, please, Vanessa begged. He's manipulating you. We're your family. No, Caleb replied firmly. You're the people who lied to me from the day I was born. He nodded toward Garrett, is the man who chose to be my father even knowing I wasn't his biological son. That makes him more family than any of you ever were. Lily, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. I always knew something was wrong, she said quietly. I used to dream about a man watching us from a distance, waiting for something. I put him in my paintings. She looked directly at Garrett. It was you, wasn't it? All this time. Garrett nodded slightly, surprised by her perception. In a manner of speaking. What happens now? Lily asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Now you all face the consequences of choices made long ago, Garrett replied. Every aspect of your lives, financial, legal, social, is about to collapse. The only variables are how you respond and what, if anything, you might salvage from the wreckage. He turned to leave, Caleb at his side. At the door, he paused and looked back at the shattered family. Preston Harlow disappeared because you left him no choice. His entire reality was a fabrication designed to benefit everyone but him. He was a decent man who trusted those who didn't deserve trust, loved those who were incapable of love in return. That man is gone forever. I am what remains, what you created. Remember that in the difficult days ahead. As they walked out together, Caleb asked, Is it over now? The exposure is complete, Garrett replied. The dismantling of their lives will continue automatically through mechanisms I've established. But true justice? That's only beginning. They spent years watching Preston suffer without his knowledge. Now they'll spend years knowing I'm watching them suffer, fully aware there's nothing they can do to stop it. And what about us? You and me? And Lily and Noah? Garrett paused, considering the question. The part of him that had once been Preston felt a pull toward these young people who had been pawns in their parents' schemes. But that part was deeply buried beneath the hardened layers of Garrett Reed's calculated vengeance. You chose truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty. That choice has consequences, but also rewards. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. As for your siblings, Lily seems to possess an understanding beyond her years. If she demonstrates the same courage you have, there may be a place for her. Noah, he shook his head. He follows too closely in his mother's footsteps. His path depends entirely on choices he has yet to make. As they drove away from Aspen Grove, Garrett watched in the rearview mirror as his operatives delivered additional documents to local media representatives who had been anonymously summoned to the care center. By evening, the complete story of the Harlow family's deception would be public knowledge, the final nail in the coffin of their former lives. 10 years after Preston Harlow had vanished, leaving behind only a note saying, I know everything. Goodbye. Justice had finally been served. The family that had betrayed him now faced a future as carefully constructed in its misery as their betrayal had been in its deception. And Garrett Reed, the phoenix that had risen from Preston Harlow's ashes, would watch it all unfold, remote, implacable, and utterly without mercy. Some debts, he had learned, could only be paid in full. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.